This afternoon. This is my swan song as a civil servant, since I'm retiring in a few weeks' time. I'd like to reflect on 10 years in the Innovation Lab in Northern Ireland. We're about the same age as the Policy Lab in London. We started about the same time with probably slightly different trajectories, but I just want to talk over some of the lessons that I've learned. I'd like to share them with you, and then maybe some thoughts about what needs to happen next, in my view, to safeguard all these innovation labs, policy labs, and all the work of the policy design community. So how we look at the agenda then, which is the second slide, and what I want to cover off is something around the value proposition. I want to talk about that, sort of the background, because I think we need to look at the value proposition and what we do, and it's time to refresh that. Then a quick look at the methodologies we use in the Innovation Lab in Belfast. I'm not going to take a lot of time on that. And then really the subject matter for this afternoon is the enabling ecosystem. And then finally, I'll look at something around implementation. So we'll start off then looking at the value proposition, and we'll go to the next slide after that, please. So very quickly, and I'm going to step through this, I'm not going to read it word by word, but this is our objective in the Innovation Lab in Belfast, and it's about putting service users at the heart of what we do when we're developing new public policies or services, with the overall objective to improve public outcomes. And we'll go to the next slide. And this is a nice definition of innovation, which I like to use because it puts it into the reality of what we're trying to do in our labs and in our policy teams, which is around the innovation is the creation and implementation. And that word implementation is very important because implementation is harder to do than innovation. So implementation has to be thought of up front. If you don't think about it and plan for it, well, all the best work you do in designing new policy will largely be lost. So it's new policies or processes or products, services, methods of delivery, which result in significant improvements in outcomes, efficiency, effectiveness, or quality. And that takes me then into this idea of a new value proposition. And I've been thinking a lot about this as I leave the service, because one of the things that I've struggled with over the years is very much a transactional view of what we do in the lab. In other words, how much do we cost, and how much of that cost overhead are we recovering because people are paying for our services? And that in its own right, there's nothing wrong with that. But the value of what we do is by far exceeds that, and we need to find new language to describe what we're doing. And I've been very encouraged by Andy Knight's work and the UK policy design community, and all the new language that's coming through there, and the super project work that's going on at the minute. And I would encourage you, if you're not part of that, to get involved in it and talk to Andy Knight and the team there. And this whole concept of public design. So public design has to lead to public value. And that's where we find our selling point, our uniqueness, in that we contribute to public value. So what's public value? Well, I'm not an expert in that, but I got just back one, please. Sorry, just before we move. So you have got these 4 bullet points that I've got. I borrowed those from Wikipedia. I also noticed, by the way, for those of you who are academically minded, that Marianne Muzzicato, if I pronounced that correctly, has advertised for a PhD working to her on the concept of public value. So there's an opportunity for someone who really wants to look at this in greater depth. I see public value around at the strategic level. Are we improving the outcomes for the citizens that we serve? Are we developing good policy? Are we starting with the service users and building forward? And are we bringing forward policy that we can implement that's actually going to do something and deliver the outcomes that we're looking for? So we can measure what we do in terms of improving outcomes. Also, in the service design and the quality of how we run our businesses, how good is that? And then what about trust and legitimacy? Building confidence in what we do, and also as public servants, trusting the public to give us the information that we need. And then there's the whole raft of arguments about public value because we do things in a more effective, in a more efficient way. So there's a massive subject for someone to get their teeth into. That's what we should be measuring ourselves by, I believe, and that's where we need to go. Yes, we need to recover some of our costs, and I don't dispute that. But really, the value of what we're doing is about public design, public value. Thank you. You can move on to the next slide. So I want to pay tribute to 2 papers and to Rowan, who's on the call today. These are 2 documents that were seminal in my thinking because they put language and structure on things that I was saying, but I couldn't have described them. So I'm very grateful to Rowan for her super papers. I know she was contributing to these documents. And the two papers really taught me two things. First of all, the value of being a public entrepreneur. In other words, in every public body, there are people who are working away as entrepreneurs in their own world and doing their best to improve the services that they're responsible for, or the policies that they're responsible for. And I was just delighted to see that see the legitimacy of that, and that's a wonderful term by which to describe ourselves who are in the business of getting better policy, better processes, better public services. We are public entrepreneurs, and let's give ourselves a pat on the head for doing that, and let's keep at it. So thank you for Rowan for that. And the second thing that I learned from Rowan, which was seminal for me, which was putting language on the fact that it is exceptionally hard to be an innovator in a public system. And that was Rowan's writing on the reaction of bureaucracies, the immune response of bureaucracies to change. Now, that is legitimate when the change is fraudulent, or it's where there's variation and there's inaccuracy in the systems and the processes being delivered by the public service. But it's a blunt force, and it also impinges on innovation and good policy and good service design. So being aware of that and understanding that every public system that you and I engage with has this default reaction to deal with variation. Now, I've rationalized all that in my head to some degree. And if you or I were the accounting officer at the top of the tree, so to speak, we want to be absolutely sure that everything in the system is being done properly and accurately. And we have all of these checks and balances and reviews and investigations and audits, and they're all valid. We need them, but we need to be aware that it's a blunt force, and it sees innovation and creativity as a variant, and it doesn't like it. And the people in the system are equally we are brainwashed, shall we say, into the status quo. And that's a bit of a broad statement there, so I'll not develop that much further. But the system defaults to the status quo, and once you understand that, you realize that if you're going to be a successful public entrepreneur, if you're going to be a successful innovator or policy designer, you've got to be aware of what you're up against in the system. So thanks, Rowan, for that. Those were two fantastic pieces of learning that I got, and Rowan came over and taught us some of that stuff as well. So thank you, Rowan. So next slide, please. Now, I recommend this is essential reading for any public servant who's going to do some policy design or service design, as to read Margaret Hodges' book on her view of some of the matters that were brought to her when she was chair of the Public Accounts Committee. Very insightful. And while the politicians balked at her criticism and so forth, and I understand that, there are lessons in that book, and they teach you a lot about mistakes that have been made when massive programs have been developed and they've failed. So I'll say nothing more, and I'm not getting a percentage of her fees for selling that book, but I recommend that as reading for all of us as public servants. We'll go to the next slide, please. Thank you. And I'm 8 minutes in, so I'm going to move on quickly. So methodologies, very quickly, what do we do in the Innovation Lab in Belfast? Well, go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So the first thing we do is these things called Strategic Insight Labs. And I'm indebted to Marco Steinberg from the Citra Lab in Helsinki, who gave us a lot of advice when we started off. And this is one of the principal methodologies that we use. And it's really getting all this the key stakeholders and users together to investigate a problem and come up with some of the solutions. So this is where we start on our policy journey, and it'll be supported by the next methodology. If you just drop down one, please. Next slide. So I'm calling this system dynamics modeling. Don't worry about the diagram there, but good diagnosis of what's going on in the world of the policy that you're investigating. What's happening now? How's the system operating? And getting a good view of the system. We'll also do a landscape review. What's happening? What are the initiatives that are going on at the minute? And then we convene our Strategic Insight Lab, and we'll have experts from all over the world if we can get them, along with all the stakeholders involved in that particular domain, including the problem owner, as we call it, the policy owner. And we will hothouse that problem for a couple of days and get collaboration around those things that we can get people to agree on as measures that we can put in place in order to build a new policy. And let's come to the next slide, please, just to move through these quickly. So we would also then, having got those ideas out, start to design the relevant process or the policy, and we use the principles of user-centered or design thinking. I'm not going to explain the BMW there. There's a long story about that. I haven't time to tell you about that. And the guys I work with are sick hearing the story anyway. But there's something, and we also couple that. Go ahead, please. We also couple that with behavioral science. So, and we've come up with some projects where we do what we call behavioral design. So not only do you want user-centered design to build the processes, but you want to understand the language that you're using in those processes so that you're nudging the people to do what you want them to do. So we call that behavioral design, and there's been some super projects that the guys have done in that space. But that's enough around methodology. You'll be familiar with a lot of that anyway, and there's some good projects. So go to the next slide, please. So I'm now 11 minutes in. So let me just make an observation at this point. So you can have a team of service designers, policy designers. You can have all the skill sets that you want, and I've a great team in the innovation lab in all of those spaces that I've just described there, and you can have them. But if you don't understand the ecosystem in which you're operating, well, you're going to be goosed. I don't know if that's a UK-wide term or it's just an Ulsterism, but anyway, you'll be goosed before you start, because if you don't understand the ecosystem in which you're operating, you're not going to go very far. And to go back to Rowan Conway's papers on the immune response of the large systems to change and the resistance that you're going to meet as you go through that. So next slide, please. So I've seen this in these six spaces, and it doesn't look very ecosystem. It looks very mathematical or regimented there, the way I've put that slide up. It's very hard to, I'm not very creative on slides, but I want to look at it through those six lenses, and I'm going to do it very rapidly. Now I'm 12 minutes in, 12 and a half minutes in, so I'm going to go through this here and hopefully be finished no more than about 25 minutes. So that gives me 13 minutes from now. So let's go to the first slide here, which is the personal part of the ecosystem. And I've mentioned public entrepreneurship. Are you a public entrepreneur? Have you got the energy and the drive and the determination, the passion, may I say? And I do want to emphasize that. I'm very passionate about what I do. I believe that the public need the best from its public services. It needs the best policies, and it needs passionate people involved in it and engaged in it. And if you're not passionate about it, well, you'll soon lose the will to live, because the system is going to beat it out of you, so to speak. I'm being very frank today, because I'm retiring from the 1st of January, so I can maybe say those things. But it will. The system is predisposed against you. And again, it's not an overt thing. It's an insidious thing, and people that don't actually realize they're doing it to you, and they're not doing it deliberately. But that's the effect of the system. So you need to be passionate about this, because there's some mighty big societal problems that we'll be asked to deal with, and unless you've got the stamina for the journey, and the wherewithal to navigate the ecosystem, you will find it very challenging. But we need people who are passionate, and then the sense is like, do I understand the problem? And that goes to design thinking. Have I properly diagnosed what I'm doing? Have I the staying power? Am I aware of my biases? We're all products of our upbringings and our education and our culture and our religion or whatever it is. And we will all think in certain ways, but we have to be very aware of that when we're designing new policies and systems. Anyway, let's come to the next slide, please. And it's just an emphasis, and I really love this. This is Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who makes this point in this diagram here, that very often the knee-jerk reaction of ourselves and of ministers and of senior managers is to go in at the bottom end here of the picture, and we throw in things that are basically sticking plasters, and we haven't actually investigated what the cause of the problem is. And obviously in that little diagram there, it's a broken bridge, but it's a way upstream. But if you don't do good problem diagnosis or problem definition, you end up building sticking plasters, and you wonder why they don't work. Well, they don't work because you haven't dealt with the essential problem. That's one of the big lessons of innovation, of policy design, of service design, of design thinking, is do your problem definition and you need to be very dogmatic about that because your ministers, your senior leaders will not maybe have the patience for it. So you've got to be dogmatic. You've got to do your basic research, or you end up fixing a symptom, and you're not going to fix the problem itself. And even if you do get the proper problem definition, it's still going to be very hard to fix, but at least you're starting off the right base. Okay, go to the next slide, please. Right, I've talked about empathy and passion. We need to understand from personal engagement with the people we're trying to help, because that will make a big difference to us as innovators, as policy developers. Marco Steinberg, who I mentioned at the start, one of the first things he told me when he came to visit Belfast, and he is a guru on this, and I certainly look him up and read his writing and read his commentary. He said to me, don't rely on what people tell you about the problem. Go and hear it for yourself. Go and listen. Go and meet the people whose lives you're trying to fix or help in some way. Don't rely on analysis of others. Yes, you need that analysis. You need smart people doing that, but go and feel it for yourself and have that empathy. Yeah, and that's enough for that. So that's another lesson for me around the personal aspects of the ecosystem. My mentality, my passion, my willingness to get my hands dirty, so to speak, and go and meet the people who are living lives, by the way, and may I comment, we are often, and maybe more often than not, and maybe 99% of the time, working on problems and issues to do with the lives of people, and we have never lived those lives, and we're never going to be experiencing what they're experiencing, and yet we're charged with trying to fix them. So let's not be pompous to the degree we think we know everything. Let's go and see and feel for ourselves what's going on in those lives, and that will help us to be intelligent in our policy development. Go ahead, next slide, please. I'm 17 minutes in, and watching that. This is the political one. I need to be careful what I say here, but and I don't have a lot of experience from working directly with ministers. Some of you will, and you'll have far better skills and knowledge of how to take this all on. But what I want to comment on here, and I do have this knowledge, I worked on the Universal Credit Program back at its inception in about 2010 or 2011, whenever it was. And Margaret Hodge deals with this in her book, so I'm not saying anything that has been said in the public record. And essentially, universal credit was a triumph of political ambition over the available technology and the skill sets that were around at the time, and it crashed a number of times before it really got running. It was a massive change, but the political ambition was for it to come in and won Parliament, and they're going to solve the problems of the world. And that's a case in point where political ambition far outstripped technology and the enormity of the task that there was. And there's something there about those on the call who have the access and who work directly to ministers about being able to speak truth to power and say the right things, and hopefully be received well, because you'll be saying things that'll say, well, it's just sort of yes minister stuff. That's just delaying tactics on the part of public servants. But universal credit is a good case study in this. Now, I remember back then, sorry, I'm getting reminiscing now, I'm old. Back then, all universal credit was going to happen in a parliament, and it's still not implemented. It's still in the process of being implemented, and it's a massive program. It's a fantastic concept. And it's a transitional change. It's a massive change in welfare, and it has had to take the time it has. But the political view at the time was, no, you can do it. Anyway, that's enough around the political. You may work in local government, and you'll be dealing with elected representatives there. So there's this mismatch between sometimes between political ambition and reality, and you might have a challenge to deal with that and manage politicians accordingly, or attempt to manage them, or be told you've got to get on with it anyway. Okay, next slide, please. I'm 20 minutes in, and I'm a bit slow here. Next slide, thank you. So let's talk about societal. So what I just cite here is there's a hospital, a very new hospital has been built in Enniskillen, which is down in the Lake District of Northern Ireland. The lakes, Fermanagh Lakes, beautiful part of the world. Recommend it to you if you're ever over. And obviously, folks in Northern Ireland know what I'm talking about. There's a hospital down there, and it's new, but they can't recruit sufficient surgeons to run general surgery. and they're having to move general surgery away from that location to other acute hospitals in Northern Ireland, or that was the status recently. I'm not sure what the update is, but the point here is that it makes absolute business sense that you cannot run safe services there in Enniskillen for people needing general surgery. But the uproar and the protests and the agony and all of that that go on because people rightly want a service in Enniskillen. So you have that massive disjoin at times between what what makes absolute sense on every metric. A decision looks absolutely right and it is right, but you're up against public perceptions and massive public resistance to what you're doing. So that's another thing to be aware of, because that's another very important part of your ecosystem, and particularly the more public the service is, and the more important it is in the public eye, the more emotionally charged that's going to be. And I take my proverbial hat off to all colleagues who work in the departments of health and are involved in the health sector for the massive challenges that they deal with day and daily. Anyway, that's something to be aware of. That's another aspect of your system, and you need to go in with your eyes wide open. Anyway, there we are. Let's go to the next one. I'm not going to deal with all those circles. So the organizational. This is the I call this the authorizing environment. So you live and operate within a government department, and there are hierarchies and decision making processes and business case processes, etc., etc., etc. And the question is, are you a good fit with that? Are they ambitious? Is the management lead, the leadership team want innovation? Do they want public policy to be developed? Do they have a good risk appetite? And those are many things you're going to have to weigh up as you view your role as a public entrepreneur and someone wanting to do good policy development. Are you in the right place? Are you in the right place to do that? And as we work in the different government departments here in Northern Ireland, it's amazing the difference that there are between departments and their just in their cultures and in their risk appetite. And even within departments, you can go from deputy secretaries who are really engaged and others who maybe are not quite in the same space as we are. And so it's finding your allies and finding the people within the organizations who want to do what you're keen to do, and it's finding those alliances and getting those sponsorships. And let's move on to the next slide, please. So, thank you. So let's talk about financial. I'm not going to major on this one. Suffice to say, if you're going to be a successful entrepreneur, successful innovator, policy guru in your department, you really do need to understand how you get those financial permissions to do what it is that you want to do and do your budget. And I'm not going to labor this one, but that is a very big part of your ecosystem, and you need to understand that. So let's come to the next one, please. So operational. Now, this is a very important part of your ecosystem, because whatever it is you're doing, whether it's new systems, processes, IT systems, new policies, it's got to land somewhere, and it has to go into an operational world in order to be delivered. So what I'm saying here is you need to understand that operational world as you build your new policy, as you build your new systems and processes, and you need to engage the people who are already there, because they can become significant allies in what it is that you want to do. And if you don't involve them and you just land them with something, well, they're going to resist, and they're going to be very, very difficult for you to land that innovation, that new policy. And so, and they also have significantly greater understanding of the world into which you want to land this. Because if you think of operational people here on the front line, they know they are engaging with the public, and they're the people who know what needs to be done, and they know the obstacles and so on. So that's just a little suggestion that you need to reckon on the operational aspect of your ecosystem. So I think that's the last one on the ecosystem. If we just go to the next slide, please. Yeah. So that's the ecosystem. It's a very quick canters through that. I've written a blog about it, and Andy Knight is going to be publishing that in a series of over the next 3 or 4 months. So you'll see it in writing, and I've also linked later in the presentation here. Just got a few more slides to go. where you can read it for yourself. It's all my personal view. But so I'll leave that with you. So that's your ecosystem. Understand your ecosystem, and then you're you're starting the journey. So let's say you've understood it, you've navigated it, and you've got wonderful new policy developed. So let's come to implementation. I'm going to say implementation is harder than the rest of it. Let's go to the next slide, please. So I attribute this to Sir Jeff Mulgan. I saw him demonstrate this at OECD at a conference about 4 or 5 years ago. So Sir Jeff has he let's have a look at this slide. So would you just click it, please? So okay, so this is the reality of the world in which you're innovating, in which you're creating new policies. So there you are, the left-hand side of Fibonacci's, if I've got that right pronunciation. So you start off in the beginning of the spiral. You're looking for new challenges. You've got good ideas. You've developed, tested them, iterated them, and you've made a case for them. And there they are, and you arrive at the bottom of the spiral where it says delivering and implementing. Now, I'm going to suggest to you, for the purposes of what we're talking about today, that our world as innovators, as policy developers, is to the left-hand side of this spiral. That's where all what I've been describing happens. And then you come round the next curve here and click again, please. And this is what Sir Jeff had up on, and I've remembered it ever since. You're trying to land your new policy, your new system, new service in a world that is chocker block full of stuff that needs to be euthanized, or not at all, but some of it anyway. That's a bit harsh, but and things that people are exceptionally precious about, that have got long tradition behind them, and you're going to try and land in that. And this is the hardest. But I noticed our Deputy Chief Medical Officer was on, Laura, and maybe I'm quoting this incorrectly, but I understand that an innovation in the NHS, super innovation, can take something like 5, 6, 7 years to permeate the system. So you have the most fabulous piece of policy innovation, and it's sitting on the left-hand side of the diagram, and you're going to struggle to get it implemented. So that's why I say you must be thinking about implementation right at the start of the process, and you're involving the people in the system currently delivering those services and involving them because you have a massive struggle to get up the curve, so that what you have come up with is universal. You've achieved system-wide change, and that's a massive uphill struggle. So anyway, I was going to put everybody off saying all that, but anyway, it's a great challenge. It's a wonderful space to be in. I've loved every minute of it. I would have been retired 5 years ago, only I've loved doing all this, and I'm very excited about it. And I'm going to talk about it until somebody puts me out of my misery. Or maybe I'll be euthanized if I don't shut up. Okay, so I'm 28 minutes now. I'm a wee bit over the time. Just go to the next slide, please. I'm nearly there, I think. Yeah. So this is a publication that I was responsible for, along with Tony Young, who's on the call, and some colleagues from the Centre for Effective Services on our website. And it really talks about just getting beyond the ideas, and it's really about innovation and implementing those changes. And just go to the next slide, please. And summary, and I think I have one more slide after this. I think I do. Go ahead. Yeah, and that's my lessons from the ecosystem. I've published a little document that sets out these lessons, which will be summarized on the blog, courtesy of Andy Knight. That's me finished. Thank you. That was 28 minutes. Sorry. Well, I'm under 30 minutes, which is not bad, so. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Malcolm. I think I can speak for everyone. We're getting loads of applauses in the chat. So it's an honor to hear your reflections of such a illustrious career serving the public. In the meantime, while people think of their questions, just wanted to take a quick moment to plug our Eventbrite, so you can subscribe for our series. We'll be resuming in January. We'll actually be hopping over to Wales to speak to Marie Brousseau-Navarro and Jacob Ellis for the Future Generations Commissioner for Wales about future-proofing public policy. So a nice through line from what we've been discussing today. You can subscribe to that event and also all our forthcoming events through Eventbrite. We just posted two at the same time. And without further ado, again, I've already posted further up in the chat the link to our blog, which is where Malcolm's series we publish as of January as well. And we'll be posting a survey at the end as well. So plenty of links for you to mull over, as well as the resources that people have kindly put in the chat. I'm going to go up to the top and start with a question from the chat. But if you would like to ask your question verbally as well, and put your hand up and we'll get to you. We'll go either way. We have almost half an hour, so you have plenty of time. I am going to start with Gail's question, which is, how do you systemically recognize your biases in the work?
I can't quote the documentation that I've seen, but there's various resources that are available on Google Internet as ever, which describe the different forms of biases. I think it's worth studying those and looking at them and allowing them to speak to you and to inform you as to where your biases will lie. Yeah, that's the best indication I can give without sounding as if I know everything about it, which I don't. Okay.
Thank you. Okay, Kieran has a question. Would you like to come off mute and ask your question, Kieran?
Yeah, hello. Really appreciate your time, Malcolm. So I head up public and policy design for Frog, a design consultancy. And one thing we see, so I work across all of government departments, working with civil servants, and know Andrew very well. But one of the key things about the whole system is only set up to release budget against delivery. You know, we all know that often it's to you can get big budgets for big projects, but small projects, which are more strategic, is even harder to get the money from. So how have you had conversations about how to solve that systemic challenge? You know, that government isn't set up to pay for pre-discovery hypothesis testing at the policy creation stage. I mean, that's the biggest challenge, right? How do you fund these things? No one wants to stick their head out of their own fiefdom and collaborate and risk their budget to do pre-discovery. So you really need to be talking at a treasury level. How do you fix that kind of release of budget to do things right? Have you had any conversations about that?
Yeah, I know Andy Knight and the team are looking at public value and public design. This is one of the questions that they are examining in detail. And it goes back to my slide about public value, and it's trying to move the arguments away from to the transactional cost and to this is the potential for this piece of work, and that demands good vision about what it is you're going to do, and lots of data and ways of interpreting it. And then you need our economist colleagues on board to try and translate what those things are into some form of a language that the system can recognize in terms of potential. But I get exactly what you're saying, and that's why I'm very keen that we understand this new value proposition. We've got to find new language to describe what it is we're trying to do, and how we can potentially improve outcomes, etc., etc., etc. So I don't have an immediate answer, but I'm on the same page. We need to find a way to do that more successfully.
Yeah, fair. It's not an easy one. I mean, the private sector has market forces that drive the need to prove value, right?
Yeah. But if you're talking about some of the big societal problems, the wicked problems, and again, the more stratospheric you go, the harder it is to put numbers on it, of course. But like child poverty and education, whatever it is, it's finding some metrics to measure it by, and really saying we want to get really good policy that will help to shift that curve. And again, I agree. Those are difficult conversations to have, particularly in a very constrained financial environment that we're all in at the minute.
Yeah, it's useful to look at the sustainability agenda, which is just as hard to measure, right? See, carbon measurements, etc.
Yeah, but it's interesting. We were talking about one of our projects here recently where we looked at probate, and again, it's a fairly small project, but we revolutionised the way in which probate is obtained in Northern Ireland. I think it applies across the UK as well. And one of the side benefits of that was that prior to the innovation that we introduced, everybody in Northern Ireland who wanted to have probate had to travel to Belfast to go and sign a swearing affidavit in the High Court. So that's no longer necessary. So it's just an example where there are many ways in which we can generate value, and there's a side value there because we're not generating greenhouse gases by people traveling all over the place. And every project, we should be looking at it not only through the primary lens of the benefit that we give, the immediate benefit, societal benefit, but what are the knock-on or the wider benefits of what we're doing? And that's just a case in point where if we stop people traveling, it'll save some, have some effect in the greenhouse situation. Again, very hard to measure. I agree with that. Yeah.
Thanks.
I have a question, Malcolm. Over the past around a decade now in the Innovation Hub, we've obviously in society observed so many changes politically, technologically. Are there any changes that you've observed in your tenure that you deem to be positive, that were like encouraging or unexpected, that you have embraced in your role?
I think the main thing is putting the user front and center in what we do, and that means going and talking to them. And there'll be others on the call here who do that. I belong to the generation of public servants who have landed on the public massive welfare reforms, for example, and I doubt there was many people who were framing that policy who actually went and had a conversation with the people who they were trying to help. And there's that sort of arrogance of, civil servants know best and we'll just land this. And then the irony of it is it doesn't work. And we wonder why it doesn't work. So the big thing that we have learned, and I see some of my service designer colleagues on the call here, is the value of engaging with citizens and finding out what they need. And this is the whole concept of design thinking and problem definition. And that applies to whether you're working in a policy area or in a service area. You need to understand the needs of the people that you're trying to, not their wants, but their needs. Sorry, not a very helpful comment. I'm sorry, that was a bit of a waffly answer, but I hope it sort of half answered it. Yeah.
That's great to hear that user research is taken seriously in your domain. I think it's something that with even in central government, we're definitely seeing progress in that area, but it's something we want to encourage every team to have access to, because sometimes it does come down to access. We have a question from Richard. Do you want to come off mute, Richard?
Hi, Malcolm. Great to hear from you, and I wish you all the best in the rest of your journey now. And I can see it from your face that you're looking forward to it, so that's great. We recently did some work in Scotland for Scottish Government around childcare, and it was aimed directly at going and talking to users, or the value of engaging with citizens, as you've just said. That's what we do. But I'm really interested to hear a little bit more about what you're talking about in terms of the development of a new language. That I find that a very attractive statement, but are you talking about a new language that we can talk up into the system with, bring it directly more from the user or the citizen to influence the system? What is that new language that you're referring to? Because I think that's quite an important point.
Well, I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm talking about the value proposition and public value. Yeah, I don't think the system quite gets that at the minute, and I know that Andy Knight and the whole team there who are doing this public value, public design review, are looking into this in depth. And one of the things we've talked about, and I've been at a few meetings, is actually how we translate the big public value aspect of what we do into economic speak and into business case language, so that the people who are making decisions on funding projects begin to see projects in that sort of but through that lens. Again, it comes down to affordability, and I know all of those things, but to me, it goes into the invest to save space. And if we do it well, like, these are the potential outcomes that we can get, and so forth. So I'm not sure. I don't feel it's adequately understood in our business case processes that the public value of what is being done is actually quantified and weighed with the same measures as money, if that makes sense. Yeah.
It does.
Sorry.
It does make sense. It does. But I'm keen to talk more in our work about developing that new language as opposed to adopting the language of the current system or the dominant discourse.
Yeah, and that's
good.
Yeah, that's back to my point about the immune response of the system. The system thinks in very specific ways. It's geared that way. All the governance is geared that way, and there's nothing wrong with any of that. It's just that it doesn't fit. It doesn't sit awfully well at times with innovation and creativity and wanting to do things that maybe you need to take a longer term view of the potential value of what you're doing. And I know those things are potentially there in business case speak to some degree, but I'm not sure they get the weight that they ought to have. So that's back to understanding how the system currently thinks and how do we influence it to think maybe slightly differently to see the potential public value of what we're doing. So, yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks, Malcolm. All the best.
Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Going back to the chat now, we have Martin. How can we develop a translator to ensure the value proposition of understanding user needs is seen as a vital component in policy and service development?
I missed. Say it again. Sorry, I was distracted there. Sorry.
That's fine. It's the most recent question in the chat.
Okay, right. I got it now. Okay, right. I'm scanning down here. Oh, that's my colleague Martin. He always asks me hard questions, Martin. How do we translate? I think we're on the journey of when it's back to being dogged and tenacious and relentless in making sure people are listening to us. And we need senior players. We need to persuade senior decision makers that this is the language of innovation, of policy development. And we need to get all the allies on board. And again, I'm not there to help with that, but we've got to go into, we've got to be passionate about this, and you've got to go in and go after this, because you're quite right, it'll not happen if we don't. I'll put it like this: if we don't do it as a community of policy gurus and innovation experts and practitioners, if we don't press for it, nobody will. So someone has got to take up the charge, and I think the work that Andy Knight's doing and leading is a good starting point. Yeah. Okay, Martin.
Thanks, Malcolm, as always. Thank you. And just I suppose to say to this group that, you know, Malcolm has really inspired an awful lot of us to be as passionate as he has. So, you know, it's sad that he's moving on, but we'll keep up the good fight, Malcolm.
Good. Yeah. There's Felix. Are you coming in, Felix? Or?
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much, Malcolm. Really, really enjoyed it. I guess my own kind of area of interest is the kind of specifics of the preventative proposals you've chatted a bit about. You mentioned Invest to Save, and you talked a bit about the kind of upstream kind of work that we could be doing. It's something I've seen finally talked about a little bit more in central government, but obviously I find the kind of language and the terminology about it quite problematic. I mean, the classic example is I know the Treasury are talking about doing preventative proposals, but only those that return savings within the scorecard period. So, which seems to kind of defeat the purpose. I wonder if you have any reflections on how we can talk about the kind of technicalities of preventative proposals that make them attractive, as someone's mentioned in the past, at the kind of Treasury level in terms of unlocking that funding and unlocking that kind of like longer term interest that may even go beyond kind of parliamentary cycles.
Well, that of course takes you into the political realm as well, and sort of the I'm going to say short-termism of politicians. I really think that the way, sorry, I haven't. I'm gonna do a bit of waffling here. I think the key thing here is the work that Andy Knight has started, and that whole collaboration, a super collaboration of very smart people, and it's finding the senior sponsors behind that, who then get other people on board, and at least get the opportunity to experiment, to try these things out, to do them in a safe space, which is really what design thinking is all about, and find the room within the system to do something to prove it either works or it doesn't work, because you're not going to get wholesale agreement of this. So you need some very, very senior people who are prepared to say, right, I'll give that a go. You need to find the people, again, quoting Marco Steinberg again, if you haven't read him, you need to find out about him. Marco Steinberg told me when we started the lab, he said, go and find the people who have a glint in their eye, which is a way of saying, go and find the people at the most senior levels who are passionate, and use them to support your ambition and to get you space to do what it is you want to do. Yeah.
Love that framing. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a question from, I'm just going to go to Jonah first because Kieran's already asked a question, if that's okay, Kieran. Jonah, come forward.
Thank you, skipping the queue there. Thank you, Costa. So, I mean, I think obviously a lot of language now uses that word like problem framing, and we use that quite a lot, especially in the UCD world. How do you think sort of going forward we can learn or sort of get involved with sort of the charity sector that I think definitely politically the last sort of decade or few decades or so has picked up a lot and has developed a lot in sort of the difficult areas of where government is struggling to reach. How do you see sort of potentially using this sort of the frameworks you've talked about now? How do you see that sort of going forward and connecting up with the sort of charity sector and what that might look like in the future, do you think?
Okay. In my tenure, we've had quite a lot of engagement with the charity, voluntary and community sector, charity sector. One of the things that strikes me about that is that we do it the wrong way around. And this is just a personal view, and I hope it goes somewhere to answer your question. One of the things that I've discovered is that the charity sector, the voluntary sector, are very good at coming up with innovations and tackling things that they see on the ground. And they put a lot of money into it, and then they might get a wee bit of public money to run something for 6 months, and then it all just fizzles out because you almost have a sense of they develop something and then they're looking for a problem to solve. My view is that the public sector should be saying, coming out of all of our policy work, all our projects, all our innovation, that when I'm going to my implementation spiral there, we may not necessarily be the right people to deliver some of those things. And I think that we should be going, it should work the other way around. The government bodies should be going to the voluntary community sector and saying, these are the things that we want help with, and therefore we sponsor them to give us the solutions to the problems we have. I'm not actually not very well, but what I've seen is super ideas developed in the voluntary sector, and they just die out because they haven't got the money, and they haven't been asked for by government. And while they're super and they deliver good outcomes for people on the ground, they die off. So I think we should reverse that. There's tremendous talent in the voluntary and community sector. They're very well organized. They're on the ground. They know the reality of the real world. They can put solutions out there. So let's use them, but let's use them. Let's us go to them rather than them doing speculative and nugget work sometimes in the end. Don't know if that answers your question, but that's sort of my perspective on looking back over the past few years. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you.
First to say, I'm loving the discussion happening in the chat. Please keep it up. Kieran, you can come off mute now. Thank you for your patience.
No problem. Thanks for letting me in again. So we're looking at designing the op model for a policy lab at the moment. But one of the questions we've been asked by the department is that scaling. So we're working within one program at the moment. So you've been in the lab space for 10 years. What's your approach to kind of scaling the policy lab approach or the innovation approach to the wider organization? Because really that's the kind of integration problem with the wider system. So how do you manage that in terms of scaling the influence across the org or department?
Well, I think that's where we haven't been successful, and I think it goes back to my idea about the value proposition. Up to now, we've been a very small team, and I've got some specialists. But keeping those people with the skill sets that you need and retaining them is very, very difficult, because they can command better salaries out in the private sector and so on. Scaling is a very big problem, and again, I think it's about the value proposition. If you can show these interventions are the way forward, that we should be doing service design principles it should be the standard way of business in the public sector when you're developing new policies and new systems and processes. And once you start that debate going, then you can start to scale. There's a wonderful model we saw from Singapore. There's a guy called Alexander Lau, who was the head of the policy lab in Singapore. Now, he started a lab probably about the same time as we did, and what he discovered very early on, and he was directly reporting to the Prime Minister's office there, so he had a lot of influence, was that it wasn't possible to scale the operation, but what he did was he taught the methodologies and created pockets of expertise in other places. So that was the way of spreading the methodologies, rather than attempt to grow something that big that you're going to be able to do everything, because you can't and you never will. And on that, there's an interesting perspective on innovation and policy design in Ireland, and they've taken a different route, where they have put all their energies into creating those things that enable innovation and enable policy development, and they have challenge funds, and they have learning and training and so forth. So rather than central government in Dublin creating a lab that does projects, they've gone to the bigger picture and said, how do we use limited resources to build capacity and to stimulate innovation? And that's a different way of doing it. So I don't think that answers your question.
No,
but
no,
it's a very difficult thing to
does.
scale. Yeah, very difficult.
It does fully. I mean, it follows, Google design sprint kit when they came out with 1 week sprints years ago, and it's all publicly available. So fully agree. Playbooks, tools, resources, workflow, etc. Thanks.
Yeah, and some money for
money always helps.
So they've got challenge funds and so on, and I noticed on some of the blogs I've seen that there's an invitation out now to public bodies in Ireland to bid in for money to run innovation projects and policies projects. Yeah. Okay.
Right, Felix, you can be our last question before we close.
Okay, very cheeky of me to jump in with the last one, Malcolm, but just almost on those same reflections, what do you see as the role of kind of data and evidence labs alongside policy labs? I think they often seem to kind of pop up as independent entities, but do you think that's something that should be happening within the policy labs, or do you think that should be something that essentially independently operates and can be leaned on when required?
Well, if you've got half an hour, I can give you a response to that. Taking on specialties has proved very challenging in the lab, but I think it should be part of the whole picture. And you draw in expertise, big data, the value of AI, big data. We're nowhere near tapping into the value of the information that we're sitting on as government departments. I'm talking about information and data that we would never make public because but it's there, and we're nowhere near utilizing that. I'm probably going off. I'm passionate about we should have chief data officers. I know the Department of Education, your side, has a chief data officer, and you have the streamlining of data and making sure everybody's keeping the information all in the same standard format. And then when you can start to harvest the value of that. So yes, it's an important aspect of this, and we should be working very closely with our colleagues in the data field. In fact, we have statisticians in the innovation lab who then became behavioral scientists because of their background and so on. But yeah, that was a paragraph I had no exit strategy from, so I'll put a full stop in there. Yes, we should have data experts in our labs, please. Yes.
That's excellent. Thanks so much.
Right, we've got 3 minutes left, so I think it's more prudent to close. Malcolm, thank you so much, and thank you to all the attendees as well. This has been a lovely, like, celebratory session. Hopefully, it does kind of feel like a nice send off pre-retirement. I'm just going to repost the links that I've mentioned. So in the chat, we have our next event, which is on the 11th of January. Again, 2 incredible speakers for the Future Generations Commissioner for Wales to keep with the devolution theme. And then also I'm posting a link to a survey, which is just to ask what kinds of speakers you would like to hear from in the new year. We're in the process of booking up our pipeline for speakers for the rest of 2024. So we're really keen to hear feedback from attendees, even if you're brand new to the community. And yes, we'll be closing off now. We'll give you a couple minutes back for your lunch. Thank you very much, everyone, and see you next time.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks very much, Malcolm.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Malcolm.
Yeah.
Thanks all. Well done, Malcolm.
Thanks,
Good
Mark.
stuff. See you soon. Bye now.
See ya. All the best, everybody.
Thanks, Malcolm.
Bye-bye.
See you soon, Malcolm.
Right, Neil, in the dark there.